Clickbait title and you fell for it. Sorry, I guess. Maybe not. I'm told it's important to get clicks and views. But seriously, if you clicked on this video hoping to find a way to multiply your money 5 times, well, don't worry. I'll get to it. Eventually. And if you believe that there's a legitimate way to do that, well then, whoo boy, do I have a deal for you on a bridge in Brooklyn. Now, I do promise that I'll tell you how to do it. But before I do, I wanted to explain the purpose of this channel, since this is episode 1. You see, I feel I've lived a very full life. I've experienced some of the highest highs and some of the lowest lows. And during all of it, I knew the highs wouldn't last, and the same is true for the lows. But the most important thing is that you get back up and you keep moving forward. Now, I've told a lot of people during my years that if I were to die tomorrow, I'd be at peace, because I've lived a full life and I've done most of what I set out to do. And yeah, sure, there's a few things still on my bucket list, but the big stuff I've gotten out of the way. Now, this channel won't be one of those, well, back in my day, strike that. There'll be a few of those episodes on this channel, but I promise you they won't be the kind where I'm telling you how everything was just so much better back in my day, because while some things were better back in my day, a lot of things weren't. And there's definitely a lot of things I prefer now, like the internet and YouTube. But as a society, I just hope we keep improving and getting better for everybody. But the jury's still out on that. It's looking kind of dicey right about now. And this won't be some old white guy telling the younger generations how everything is so much easier for them. I actually think it's the opposite. The younger generations have it a lot harder than mine did. I have nothing but love and much respect for the younger generations. They've just been dealt a really, really bad hand. But this channel is all about love, and love for all the generations. I think we're all humans, and we all should just love each other a little bit more. I have 3 reasons for creating this channel. The first being that whenever I meet new people and we build up some familiarity with one another, we'll start sharing stories about our past, and it'll always be the same reactions that I get from these people. They'll be amazed at some of the jobs I've had, or things that I've done, or places that I've been. Hell, they'll even be shocked sometimes that I'm still even alive. But I've always just lived my life the way I've wanted to, continually proving naysayers wrong, most of the time not taking no for an answer, just finding a way forward. But sometimes that's been to my detriment. I kid people and I'll tell them that my initials are CLM, and that it stands for Career Limiting Move. And sometimes that's been the case. Some decision makers, at least in my experience, aren't very receptive to constructive criticism. At least not the ones that are incapable of acting like adults. And I'm not trying to be a jerk when I level this criticism. But if I see something that's wrong, and I believe that it's wrong, I'm going to say something. That's just who I am. And at that point, I really don't care about your feelings or your ego. If it's wrong, it's wrong. But sometimes that has had consequences, and I've always accepted those. But I'm not changing who I am for anybody else. I'm very comfortable with who I am. Anyway, like I said earlier, I've lived a very full and interesting life, and I'd like to share a little bit of it with you. The second and main reason I'm creating this channel is for my kids. I have 2 wonderful kids, and they mean the world to me. They're both adults now, and I just wanted to document for them some of the significant events that have happened in my life. They've probably heard some of these stories, but many of them they probably haven't. And I don't know how much time I got left on this planet. None of us do. But I just figured I should start documenting some of this stuff for them so that they have it for posterity. I love you 2 monsters. Lastly, I want to create this channel in hopes that others find it entertaining. Most people are entertained when I tell my stories, and I hope you will be too. Back in my younger days, my early 20s, we'd go to the bars and hang out with my friends, and I would drink Stolichnaya vodka over ice with 2 lime wedges squeezed in there. And after a few of these, I would just start telling the stories. They would just start flowing. And my friends would kid me that it was, oh, it's time for Stolian stories. Well, I don't drink all that much anymore. And I never needed the alcohol anyway to tell good stories. I just was trying to entertain my friends. So with that, let's do it. I'm C.L. Moffat, and this is A Life Well Lived. Wait a second. A Life Well Lived? That makes a terrible acronym. ALWL? All? That's terrible. This cannot stand. What if I move this? Ooh, that's better. I can work with this. But AWLL. That's not that great either. What if this might work. Add a hyphen. Boom. I like this. A well-lived life. All. Yes, all. I love it. This is a show called All. An awl. You know, one of these things. For making holes in leather. Anyway.
I don't get mad. I get stabby.
So let's try this again. I'm C.L. Moffat, and this is A Well-Lived Life. Episode 1. Multiply your money 5 times. There's that clickbait title again. And if you came just for that, well, you're gullible. And you could just jump to the end of the video to find the answer. But if you're going to stick around with me, my stories, they're a journey. We'll wander. We'll go off on some tangents. But hopefully you'll find it informative, interesting, and hopefully entertaining. And I promise I'll get to the answer. We'll do it eventually, but let's go on a little journey. But before I can tell you my money-making scheme, I got to tell you a little bit about my upbringing and the circumstances of my childhood and how those circumstances led to me coming up with this money-making scheme. I grew up in Chicago from the mid-70s all through the 80s. It was my brother, me, and my parents. And I describe our childhood as lower middle class. And from the time frame I've just given you, you'd be correct to assume that I'm a Gen Xer. You know, the forgotten ones. Sandwiched right there between the boomers and the millennials. Well, most of us, we like being forgotten. Just leave us alone. Now, one of the stereotypes of my generation was that we were all latchkey kids. And well, for my brother and I, that was certainly the case. Both of my parents worked full-time jobs. Hell, there was even times when they both had part-time jobs on the side at the same time. And we would leave for school in the morning and they'd already have left. And when we would come home, it would be an empty house. And, you know, the latchkey refers to the fact that as kids, we always had to take our keys whenever we left so that we could get home and open the latch, or the lock as it's called in America. And sometimes we would forget those keys, and that had some dire consequences. But that's a story for another episode. Because we were home alone so much, we were responsible for doing our homework, feeding ourselves, and most importantly, entertaining ourselves. And oh boy, did we get into some hijinks. Now, Chicago is my home, and I've always loved it. And I've lived my entire life here except for 15 years when I was gone for college and work. The house we lived in on Narragansett, I consider that our childhood home. We were there from 1983 to 89. And for the longest time, it was the house that I'd lived in the longest. And that might be shocking, it's only 6 years, but I've moved around a lot in my life. Now, when we first moved into the neighborhood, it was a very Italian neighborhood. And every summer in the big local park named Reese Park, they would have this huge Italian festival. And it was pretty fun. But even though that the neighborhood was predominantly Italian, it was also very, very diverse. My friends and I, and yes, 40 years later, I'm still friends with some of the kids I knew growing up. We used to kid that we had the United Nations of friends. We had damn near every ethnicity or racial group represented. We knew kids that were Mexican, African American, Puerto Rican, Ukrainian, Cuban, Thai, Taiwanese, Filipino, Chinese, Greek, Egyptian, Italian, Indian, and this being Chicago, of course, Polish. And I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch. My oldest friend, he's Vietnamese. He and his family came over here right after the fall of Saigon. He was my first friend in that neighborhood, and he's still my friend to this day, over 40 years later. Now here's the thing about growing up as a kid with so much diversity. You don't care how society identifies your friends. To you, they're just other kids. They're your friends. Racism? Racism is a learned trait. Now sure, if you've grown up in a homogenous society or culture, you're going to be a little suspicious of different people, of outsiders. That's just human nature. But that's your lizard brain talking there. Humans have evolved past that point. We have better cognitive capabilities now. So suppress those urges and be more loving to one another. Be kind to everybody. I loved growing up in Chicago the way we did, and I very much enjoyed my childhood. We became fiercely independent, and we weren't afraid of much. And I really wouldn't trade it for anything. So this is the Chicagoland area. Now I grew up in the Galewood, Belmont, Cragen neighborhood of Chicago. Let's zoom in here on my neighborhood. Oop. Oh, I'm overshooting it a little. Sorry about that. Let's slide up to the north a little bit. There we go. So there are 5 major areas in my neighborhood. The Brickyard Mall, which was over here. Reese Park. Hanson Park. That was a bit further away, but I played Little League Baseball there, so I went there frequently. There was a rail line that ran through our neighborhood, mostly going east to west. It had commuter trains and freight trains. And then lastly, Burbank Elementary is where we went to school. It was about a 3-block walk for us every day. As kids, we frequented all these places and many more. We didn't have a lot of money growing up, so we had to find plenty of ways to entertain ourselves without it, and Reese Park was at the center of a lot of it. Reese Park is named for famed muckraker Jacob Riis. He was born in Denmark, but left in 1870 when he was 21. He was an advocate for the poor and the downtrodden through the use of his brilliant photography. He was also a big proponent of open green spaces and parks within urban areas. He visited Chicago in the late 1800s, and he pushed the city to build more playgrounds. The Park District bought the land in 1916 and finally developed it in 1928. Chicago is a very, very flat city, but there is a slight hill that runs directly through the length of the park from north to south. In fact, it runs through most of the entire city itself. It's the remnants of an old shoreline of the ancient Lake Chicago, the precursor lake to Lake Michigan. And interesting to note, if you've lived in the Blue Island neighborhood, or ever been there and wondered why it was so far inland and called Island, well, now you know why. When I was a kid, I thought this hill was massive. We'd come here every winter right after it snowed, and we would sled down this hill, or play tackle football in the snow. Fun times. A little bit to the east of the big hill was the park's public pool. And this is where we'd spend our hot summer days. None of us had air conditioning at our houses, so it was either go down into the basement when it got really hot, go to the pool, or just suffer. We just suffered a lot. On the really hot days, the line to get in would stretch almost the entire length of this fence. Then they'd open the gate, and you could go into your respective locker room. You'd grab a basket, put your stuff in it, give it to the guys running the cage, and they'd give you back a safety pin. The safety pin had a metal tab attached to it with a number. That's where your stuff was now stored while you went to swim. You weren't allowed to bring anything into the pool, and that even included towels. I learned to swim here. If you wanted to go into the deep end, the lifeguards would make you swim the entire length of the deep end. Well, I always wanted to go into the deep end because I like diving down to the bottom, so I just taught myself how to swim. It's funny what you can do when you put your mind to it. When we got out of the water and wanted to dry off, we just laid down on the hot concrete and baked ourselves. Yeah, because there also were no chairs. When we first moved into the neighborhood, I was probably 8 or 9. And for weeks I begged my mom to buy me a nice pair of gym shoes. You know, name brand. And after weeks and weeks of me nagging her, she finally relented and she bought me a brand new pair of Pumas. We didn't have Nike money. But either way, I was happy. Now, I had been wanting to go to the Reese Park pool ever since we moved into the neighborhood. And one day I went on my own. And I wore those brand new Pumas on my first trip to the Reese Park pool. Now, never having been there before, I was a little unsure of what to do when I got inside the locker room. Well, there was this kid there, and he must have seen me coming from a mile away with my brand new shoes. And he grabbed a basket and he said, "Hey, throw your stuff in here with mine. I'll take care of you." And being the naive kid that I was, I obliged. Now, to get into the pool, you had to go down this gauntlet of a shower. It was this long corridor, and it shot water at you from all sides, even below. I'm talking cold Lake Michigan water, and you weren't allowed to run. It was the worst part about going to the pool. Well, my new friend, he went first, but it took me a while to build up the courage to go down the shower gauntlet. I've never liked cold water on my skin, and to this day I still don't. And when I got into that pool area, that new friend of mine, he was nowhere to be found. And I looked all over the pool. In the pool deck, couldn't find him. Finally went into the locker room. He was gone. He took my shoes. Stolen them. All my other stuff too. And I had to walk home 6-7 blocks, barefoot. And then I had to tell my mom, "All those nice new shoes you got me, they're gone. Some kid stole them at the pool." I was humiliated, embarrassed. I felt horrible. And my mom had to buy me a new pair of shoes. And she didn't replace them with new Pumas. I'm pretty sure I got those Payless Pro Wings. Crappy ass shoes. If you know, you know. Tough times. Here's where the pool was, over here. As I mentioned, not too far from where this hill was. As kids, we were all little pyros for some reason. We always carried disposable lighters. None of us smoked, but we were always lighting stuff on fire. You see this area over here? It's the parking lot. And every winter after Christmas, you could bring your Christmas tree here for disposal. This one particular winter, the mound of trees was exceptionally high. And all of us were playing on it, climbing to the top, playing King of the Hill, throwing each other off the top. You know, stupid kid stuff. We eventually got tired of it, and we were just sitting around resting. One of us, I don't remember who, pulled out their lighter and proceeded to light one of the trees on fire. Oh boy, do dried Christmas trees really ignite. We tried in vain to put it out, but it was spreading too fast. Well, we did what any kids our age would do in that situation. We ran. We ran deeper into the park, around this area. From where we were, we could see this orange glow from the direction we had run from. And also the smoke. Lots of smoke. We just kind of hung out there not knowing what to do. And after a few minutes, we heard the sirens. That's when we decided to get out of there. We all went back to our houses to lay low. Luckily, the Chicago Fire Department put it out, and since the pile of the trees was in the middle of the parking lot, there was no damage to anything else. You see, now that my kids are adults, I can tell these foolish stories and not have to worry about them emulating the stupid things we did when we were kids. At the west end of the park is the Reese Park Lagoon, designed by Alfred Caldwell. He also designed the beautiful Lily Pool in Lincoln Park, a true hidden gem within Chicago. We would come here to fish. They had stocked it with bluegill and crappie, and in the winter we'd play on the ice. My brother fell through once, but it's very shallow, so being wet and cold was the worst of it. This is also where I found my bike after it was stolen. The thief just chucked it into the pond. This detail will be important in a bit. Not far from the lagoon is this plaque dedicated to Jacob Riis. Unfortunately, some jerks felt the need to put graffiti all over it. Can't have nice things anymore. I wish I could make out what it says. What if I try to do what they do on those detective TV shows? Enhance. 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 Cool. I just love technology. The plaque reads, Jacob A. Riis, born in Ribe, Denmark, May 3rd, 1849. Died in Barre, Massachusetts, May 26th, 1914. Friend of the children, defender of the poor and suffering, champion of American ideals. If I were asked to name a fellow man who came nearest to being the ideal American citizen, I should name Jacob Riis. Theodore Roosevelt, erected by Americans of Danish origin, 1929. Now, Theodore Roosevelt, I can't think of anyone who is more a quintessential American than this man. And here's Theodore Roosevelt saying that Jacob Riis is the prototypical American, an immigrant. Think about that for a bit, you xenophobes. Quick side note on muckrakers, and I know, we're on a tangent of a tangent, but here we are. I think one of the most famous muckrakers, at least where Chicago is concerned, is Upton Sinclair, because of his famous novel The Jungle, which was set in Chicago just after the turn of the last century. Now, Mr. Riis had been raking the muck well before Sinclair, being almost 30 years his senior, but it's probably safe to say that Sinclair had a much bigger impact over Riis. That impact being federal laws that addressed health violations and unsanitary conditions within the meatpacking industry. However, what most people fail to grasp about the book The Jungle, especially at the time of its release, was that while Upton Sinclair found the unsanitary conditions of the meatpacking industry to be abhorrent, it was the working conditions for those on the factory floor itself that he found most appalling. He quipped, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident I hit it in the stomach. So sure, unsafe meat is bad, but treating your workers not much better than the cattle they're slaughtering was much, much worse." Oh, and Upton Sinclair also wrote Oil, which the movie There Will Be Blood starring Daniel Day-Lewis was loosely based upon.
I drink your milkshake. I drink it up!
Okay, let's try to get back on track here. If we zoom out a little, we'll get a better feel for my neighborhood. This diagonal street, that's Grand Avenue. And we lived over here on Narragansett. Imagine having to learn how to spell that word as an 8-year-old. Now, Steinmetz High School was our neighborhood high school, but in Chicago you could go to whatever high school you wanted to as long as you applied and got accepted. And fun fact, Steinmetz High School is where Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy, graduated. So when we weren't causing havoc in our neighborhood, we exported our nonsense to other areas. Growing up in the 80s was the golden age of arcade video games, and we loved video games. What kid doesn't? Sure, we had the Atari 2600, and later the Nintendo Entertainment System, but the arcade games were way better. Problem was, arcade games cost a quarter, and we didn't have much money. There were some places in our neighborhood where we could go and play the video games, and I'll get to those in a bit, but for us, the mecca was Aladdin's Castle at the Harlem Irving Plaza, otherwise known as the Hip. Now, the fact that this place was called a plaza and not a mall always puzzled me as a kid. I always equated plaza with strip mall and mall with a fully enclosed shopping area, which the Hip was fully enclosed. Well, the Hip was built in 1956 as an outdoor shopping center, hence the name with plaza in it. But in 1979, they fully enclosed it and just kept the plaza moniker. And because everyone already knew the place as the Hip, calling it the Him would be kind of weird. So we'd save up our money and occasionally make the 3.3 mile walk over to the Hip. Why did we walk when Chicago has great public transit? Because the bus, or as we referred to it, the big green limousine, cost money. And that meant less money for video games. When I scoured the internet trying to verify how much the bus cost when we were kids, I kept finding that it was 90 cents with a 10-cent transfer. Now this didn't jive with my memory. I remembered it being only 40 cents. But I finally did find a site that confirmed my memory. The reduced fare was 40 cents with a 10-cent transfer, which is what we would have paid being kids. The transfer was good for 2 hours, but we would stay at Aladdin's Castle for much longer than that. Now we could have taken the Grand Bus to the transfer station, pay another 10 cents, and then get on the Harlem bus, and sometimes we did this, depending on the weather. But mostly we walked. We walked because taking the bus would be $1 for each of us in bus fare. That's 4 extra video games, people, per person. That was huge to us. How come we didn't ride our bikes? Because none of us had locks and chains, which is how my bike was temporarily stolen, and as I mentioned, chucked into the Riis Park Pond. So we walked it, 6.6 miles round trip to save $1. As kids, time we had, money we didn't. It would take us about an hour to walk there. One of my dad's part-time jobs for a bit was working at Aladdin's Castle. He loved to play video games too, and he was completely addicted to Dragon's Lair when it came out. I was actually cleaning out my storage unit the other day, getting rid of a lot of crap I don't need, and I happened to come across an old Aladdin's Castle token. There it is. I mean, it's a little worse for wear, but it's been over 40 years. I'm just shocked I even had the thing. Really though, going out to Aladdin's Castle was the exception. But thankfully, if we still wanted to get our arcade game fix, there were a few places in the neighborhood that had machines, namely the local pizza joint and the bowling alley. The pizza joint usually had 2 games, the convenience store next door usually had 1, but the bowling alley had several, up to 5 if I remember correctly, and usually they were the newer games. Of course, the convenience store and local pizza joint are long gone, replaced by a Mexican bakery and restaurant. The pizza place was called the Brutzi's. We did not like their pizza. We got ours from a different place called Amato's, which is still around. So, I do guess it was better pizza in the long run. The old neighborhood is mostly Mexican these days, but not only has the racial ethnic makeup of the neighborhood changed, so has the age demographic. It skews much younger now than when I was living there. In fact, the Chicago Public Schools put a huge addition onto my elementary school. And even that wasn't enough to handle the influx of young children into the neighborhood. So they had to also build a whole new elementary school within the southeast corner of Reese Park, incorporating its old field house as the new school's gymnasium. Allow me one last tangent before the big reveal. On Sundays, my mom would give us $1 in quarters so we could go and buy the Sunday newspaper, because it was filled with coupons. Now we could have easily gone to the convenience store to purchase it, but my brother and I would come to this corner where they had the newspaper vending machines for both the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times. Why does it matter where we got the Sunday paper? I really like this image for 2 reasons. 1, it shows the different styles of newspaper vending machines there were. And 2, because I like the headline. It mentions the capture of Saddam Hussein, which played a small part in a book I wrote years ago. Yet another story video for another time. We cannot go tangent off another tangent again. We don't have that kind of time. So these worked by putting your coins in the slot, and when the proper amount had been inserted, you could pull the handle and open the door, which swung down. Now nothing prevented you from taking more than 1 paper, but why would you really need multiple newspapers? If for whatever reason you changed your mind and didn't want a paper after all, or more likely, the coins got jammed, you could push that little black button in the center of the head of the machine, and your coins should be returned in the coin return next to the door's handle. Now here's what my brother and I would do, and why I like this picture so much. You see the 3 machines on the left are different physically from the ones on the right, namely with regard to the coin return button. My brother and I exploited a flaw in the design of the 3 machines on the right. If you mashed on that coin return button while simultaneously pulling on that door handle, it would open, and we would get a free paper. Well, at least it was free for us. And for not having to pay for the paper, we each got to go play 2 video games at the bowling alley. Yay us. As you can see on the machines on the left, the manufacturer of these machines started adding this guard above the coin return button to prevent people like us from doing this. Here's a better image where you can better see this guard that they added on later models. Newspaper vending machines are so rare these days, even more rare than actual newspapers. Just different times. Now, finally, enough tangents, enough exposition. It's time for the big reveal. How to multiply your money by 5 times. Now before I do, I repeat, I caution, do not do this. Do not try this at home. I am warning you. Don't do it. So I said 5 times. This to this is 5 times. How do we turn this into this? Well, with this. I call this particular hammer the Persuader. I keep this one in my car in case it acts up. I didn't have this nice hammer back in the day. This is just for demonstration purposes. I had to use one of my dad's ball peen hammers instead. You see, a nickel's diameter is smaller than a quarter, but it's a little bit thicker as well. And my logical monkey brain, I figured if I could flatten a nickel enough, smash it down, I could get it to be the thickness and diameter of a quarter. So we had an unfinished basement, and I'd go down into the mines and use my hammer and turn nickels into quarters. Child labor laws be damned. I couldn't even say that it was hard but honest work. because it certainly wasn't honest. It definitely was hard, though. It would take quite a few whacks with a hammer to flatten it out to be the size of a quarter, and even more so when you're only 11 years old. Now, this scheme would never work at Aladdin's castle because they use tokens, as I've already shown you. But it would work at the bowling alley, which was our favorite place to go when we didn't head out to Aladdin's castle. So for $1, I could play 20 video games instead of just 4. That's a big deal when you're a poor kid. And it worked. You just put the coin right in the slot, and it would ring up a credit just as if you would put a quarter in there. But it didn't last long. About a few weeks later, we would go into the bowling alley and they would start checking us out a little more closer than usual. And that's when we figured out that they probably had opened up the coin slots and found some flattened nickels in there that were pretty useless to them. And that's when we knew the jig was up. It was great while it lasted. Well, at least it was great for us. This was the bowling alley, the scene of the crime. I actually remember as a kid some guy shooting at some other guy outside here. I didn't hang around to see the outcome. But the bowling alley is long gone. It's been converted to some kind of indoor soccer field, believe it or not. They play a weird modified version of soccer, or football, inside here now. No more pins falling. The players can't really elevate the ball much either because the rafters holding up the roof are so low. They've stretched a net across the rafters, and when the ball hits the net, they stop play and give the ball to the other team. And as you can see, the goals are just cut out in the wall. Any ball striking the wall is considered out of play, though I think it'd be much cooler to pass it to yourself off the wall and then kick it into the goal. It would make it kind of like volleyball soccer. At least they found some new use for the old bowling alley instead of just tearing it down. And it looked to be very busy on this Sunday when I went in there. Well, that's it. I hope you maybe learned a little, enjoyed the journey and the story, and were hopefully entertained. I hope to see you next time. Bye.
Skippity, skippity. That's all, folks.